Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Sports Talk with Austin, your daily dose of sports and entertainment. And today we are going to be talking about the Week 3 AP Poll Top 25. It came out this morning, and we're going to talk all about it. We're going to see who moved up, who moved down, who moved out. A lot of shakeup this week after a big weekend. So let's get right into it, shall we? So starting off with number one, once again this week, is Georgia for the third consecutive week. No shock here. The Bulldogs have been doing it all year long. They'll continue to be number one until someone of the likes of Tennessee or maybe Ole Miss can maybe knock them off. But Georgia and Carson Beck, all the talent across the field, looking good. I have no issue with the Dogs being at one. Coming in at number two is the Michigan Wolverines. Same deal as Georgia. J.J. McCarthy and company, beat UNLV and East Carolina in dominant fashion, both of them. And, Jim Harbaugh, the 3-game, self-imposed university ban. That ends in 2 weeks against Rutgers. But Michigan, kind of in the same boat as Georgia. Their first big test will be against Minnesota week 6. And we'll see what stuff Michigan is made of. But they have a lot of talent, a lot of ball players on their team. So at number 2, no arguments here on this side of things. At number 3, we have the Florida State Seminoles. And obviously, this is a well-deserved ranking. After what they did week 1 in Camping World Orlando, throttling LSU, they absolutely deserve to be in the top 5. You can maybe make an argument. You can jump them ahead of Michigan or maybe even Georgia based off that performance. Maybe. But Florida State at number 3, they played Southern Miss, took care of business, had that big win over LSU, and got a big showdown in 2 weeks with Clemson and Death Valley. Florida State keeps this up, they might be a playoff lock. Now, speaking of big jumps, coming in at number 4, you got the Texas Longhorns. Is Texas truly back? Well, after beating Rice week 1, and this week beating Alabama 34-24 on the road in Tuscaloosa, and Quentin Ewers balling out. He didn't get hurt this time. He was able to finish the game. Texas looks scary. They do. They look scary. And, this was Texas's big test this week. If they beat Alabama and they won, maybe Texas could stake a claim that they're for real and they're here. But they got to keep it up, though. Big 12 plays coming up very soon for the Longhorns. So let's see how far they take it. Let's see if they can continue this journey or if they're going to do what Texas does sometimes and falls off the wagon. But at least for now, congratulations on after a big win against Alabama this past weekend. Let's see if you can keep it going. But Texas at number 4, well-deserved. Beating Alabama, justified. Going from 11-4, totally cool with it. You beat Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide in their building by double digits. Yeah, I can get down with 4. Coming in at number 5, you've got the USC Trojans. Now, last week, USC was 6. This week, they're 5. They jumped a spot, and the performances they're putting together are really, really phenomenal. 49-3 this past weekend against Stanford. But once again, had to put these performances in context. They played Nevada, Stanford, San Jose State. Not very good teams. So, yes, we have to give USC their love, their flowers, and their credit. We also have to look at their competition. The 3 teams that they have beaten are arguably either not very good or are just absolutely dumpster fire. So USC, number 5, I'm good with it. just based off the explosiveness of their offense. Their defense is starting to put things together. But once again, proper context. They played three of arguably the worst teams, or possibly not very good teams, depending on the season. But USC at 5, that's fine. Now coming in at number 6, you've got the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, many people may say 6 is a little, too low for Ohio State, but you got to put in context that Ohio State has got some questions to answer all around the field, especially quarterback, because Kyle McCord had a decent day against Indiana. Many people may look at the score and be like, "Oh, Indiana sucked. Ohio State was impressive." That wasn't the case. Indiana made Ohio State work for those 23 points. And even then, if Indiana would have capitalized on some of those possessions that Ohio State gave to them, that game might have been a lot closer. But they still got the win. This week they played Youngstown State. Ohio State, their biggest test, is going to be against Notre Dame. We will see how good Kyle McCord or Devin Brown is, because there's many questions out there. Oh, maybe Devin Brown should take the snaps that game because McCord is too much of a game manager. Well, they got WKU on the docket this week, so let's see how they perform against WKU, who's a pretty decent team. They always seem to do well in Conference USA, and they always seem to make a bowl. So let's see how they do against them. But Ohio State, not much to go off just yet, but they do have a lot of things to clean up, especially that quarterback room. We'll see how that is come Notre Dame. But on to number 7 is the Penn State Nittany Lions, who took care of business against West Virginia. And then this week against Delaware, Penn State did what they were supposed to do. So the AP committee, obviously accounting for the opponents and what Penn State's supposed to do. Drew Allar looked good in both those games. And I think Penn State, they play Illinois this week. Another big test for them. It'll be their biggest test to date until they get to Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan, those 3 teams. But until they get to them, Penn State, not much to go off of. West Virginia, you could say that's a pretty decent win, but, maybe the AP committee considers West Virginia a winnable game, and they should have won that, and maybe that's why Penn State's still stuck at 7. But for now, that's a good ranking. Coming in at number 8 is the Washington Huskers. Now, this is kind of interesting. Washington, took on Boise State week 1. Boise State kind of gave them a run for their money. And then Washington's like, oh, no. Let's fix this now. And then they blew the doors off. And then Tulsa, kind of hung in there with Washington because it was 22-3. They were hanging around. Washington wasn't as explosive. And then they got it going. But Washington, coming from the ranking that they were the last couple weeks, all the way to 8, jumping over a couple teams that we'll get to here in just a second, I think a lot of potential is on Washington because of their explosive offense. Their defense is a big, big question, but Michael Penix looked really good. Other than the sluggish starts that they've had, Washington seems to be in pretty good business. Now, at number 9, you've got the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I think Notre Dame, they beat NC State. They pulled away late in the 3rd and 4th quarter. And Penn State was the biggest test. NC State was the biggest test for Notre Dame up to this point because they played Navy, Tennessee State. You really couldn't get much off of that. Like with a lot of these top-ranked teams, unless you're Texas or Florida State, you don't get much off of them until they play somebody worth of note. You just go off the talent and what they have there already plug in and play. So, for Notre Dame, I wouldn't say a great win, but a very good win against NC State. especially in a hostile environment on the road. Good job. Congratulations to all the Notre Dame fans, but you've got Central Michigan this week, and then you got Ohio State coming down the pipe. And then that schedule, we're going to see what you're made of because you've got Duke, you've got Louisville, got USC, Clemson. We're going to see what you're made of. So you could go potentially higher or could drop a few if you lose some of those games. But number 9, I think, is a good ranking for now. At number 10 is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, obviously, they were number 3 last week. And, everyone, after that Middle Tennessee State game, everyone was praising Jalen Milroe and saying how Alabama is going to beat Texas, especially Tuscaloosa. And it turned out Milroe, when he was pressured and he threw a couple picks and Alabama turned the ball over, the offensive line play was not quite up to standard. So Alabama's got a lot of things to fix. And now sitting here at 1-1, they haven't begun conference play yet, but that begins very soon. But Alabama better get this fixed because their season is on the line from here on out if they want any shot of making the playoffs. Because they got LSU, they got Tennessee, A&M, Ole Miss, Arkansas, all coming down the pipe. And if Alabama can't get these issues fixed, their O-line, their defense is what was holding them up, if we're being quite frank. But even the defense was getting burned by Ewers and Adonis Ross and Xavier McKinney. Alabama just looked like a disaster. The worst I've ever seen Alabama play since I've been watching. And I've been watching for over 20 years. And I think Bama, they don't have that receiving core and quarterback play like they're used to. They're going to have to invent some new ways to get some wins. But on this ranking, though, I understand you can't drop them out of the top 10 just yet. It's one performance. Let's see how they fix it. So at number 10, I'm okay with. Now, coming in at number 11 is Tennessee, who I just mentioned plays Alabama here a few weeks down the pipe. Tennessee had a bit of a struggle against Austin Peay this past week. That game was 13-6 at the halftime. And then all of a sudden, Tennessee did manage to pull away. But it was a lot closer than it should have been for a while. But Tennessee, they've got some games coming up, Obviously, they've got A&M, they've got Bama, they've got Kentucky coming down the pipe. So Tennessee's going to have a chance to improve on this ranking as well. But them at 11, it looks like their defense is somewhat improved. Joe Milton's looking real good right now. But all that talent that Tennessee lost, they did replenish, and they're looking good for now. But looking at the competition that they played and the way they played up to this point, they're right there on the fringe. If they get one big win, they may jump a couple spots, especially a couple of the team's performances. Alabama, another bad performance could drop them even more. That's crazy to think, Alabama out of the top 10. But Tennessee at 11, good ranking. Now at number 12, you got the Utah Utes. Utah, 2 games without Cam Rising. They handled Florida week 1. And then week 2, Baylor gave them everything they had and then some. It took a late touchdown rally, a Cole Bishop pick to set Utah up for the game-winning drive, the game-winning touchdown. Utah has got some things to fix, for sure. But, Cam Rising, hopefully he gets back and healthy soon. And that'll fix a lot of that issues. But Utah's defense, has been balling. Giving up 13 and 11 points, that's pretty good. Most teams would only dream of giving up that much. But, without Cam Rising, when they get down into the season, play USC, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, when they go up to Beaver Stadium to play Oregon State in a couple weeks, they're going to need Cam Rising. They're going to need him there for those games. And I think personally, Utah 12, They're still a very good team. They're still more likely to go 9-3, 10-2, compete for the Pac-12. But the way they struggled against Baylor, who lost to Texas State, I could see maybe why the AP poll put them at 12, because you have to have some sort of balance in there as well. You can't just put them up because they won, but you also have to realize, oh, you did struggle against Baylor, and Baylor may not be as good as we thought they were going to be. Now, speaking of another Pac-12 team who struggled, number 13 Oregon, they played Texas Tech, and Texas Tech, who lost to Wyoming in that overtime thriller, 35-33. Now all of a sudden, Oregon is on the ropes, 27-18. Bo Nix, they get the touchdown, they get the field goal, then they get the pick six, and then Oregon hangs on and survives with their defense. But boy, oh boy, Oregon has got some things to fix. The offense, when that run game is not clicking, they very easily can be stopped, and I think that, if you're an Oregon fan, is a little worrisome. And, the defense, as much yardage as they gave up, they were able to get a turnover, get that pick six, like I just mentioned, that turned the game 38-30 against Tech, and was able to win the game for them. Now, is Oregon's defense going to be like USC's, be opportunistic and get picks and turnovers and fumbles, and that's what's going to hold the defense up? Or is their defense, just going to give a ton of yardage and hope that they can win shootouts? Because if that's the case, boy, oh boy, Oregon may be in trouble. But Oregon at 13, considering the teams ahead and behind, Oregon, like I said, it's a good win that they beat Texas Tech, but got to be better. That defense got to be better, and that offense got to get going sooner. But Oregon at 13. Now, coming in at 14, LSU. Obviously, Florida State, who's third in the rankings this week. LSU got trounced by Florida State, especially in that second half. And then they come back, LSU beats Gambling. Congratulations, LSU. You did what you were supposed to this week. Now, like I said, for Alabama, LSU's got plenty of opportunities to make up for that Florida State loss. Of course, they've got Bama, they've got A&M, they've got Kentucky. No, excuse me, they don't have Kentucky, but you get what I'm saying. They have plenty of opportunities. Now, whether they capitalize on them or not, I don't know. That's the big question coming in for LSU. They're a very talented team. They're loaded on both sides of the ball. But, you can't give LSU that much credit. They did what they're supposed to against Gambling. But you also can't degrade them too much, because they did play Florida State. And Florida State looks to be pretty darn good. So they kind of get a little bit of a pass. But LSU at 14, very interesting. Now at number 15, the Kansas State Wildcats. Their team lost a lot of talent, but won the Big 12 the last year with Deuce Vaughn, Will Howard. Now Will Howard's back, but Kansas State, coming into this season, a lot of people thought they'd take a regression, and so far they've looked pretty good. They were on upset alert possibly against Troy. Won that game 42-13, no problem, no issues. Looked good as they could ever. And Kansas State, once again in the loaded Big 12, got plenty of opportunities to improve, and I think the best is yet to come for them. Now, at number 16, you got Oregon State. You got the Beavers. Now, they played San Jose State and UC Davis. Two teams who are more than likely not going to be very good. So, but DJ looked good in both games. The O-line and the Oregon State defense looked for real. Oregon State's going to be a serious threat in the Pac-12. They're going to give Utah and they're going to give the Ducks a run this year. They're even going to give Washington a run. But, as they say, whatever happens, happens. And if Oregon State If they are half the team that we think they are, they will win 2 out of 3, maybe even win all three. But Oregon 16, Oregon State at 16. Now at 17, you got the Ole Miss Running Rebels. You got Ole Miss. Now they're a very interesting one because they beat a very good non-Power 5 team. They beat Tulane, who more likely is the favorite in the American, possibly. But they Ole Miss, that was a really good win. Jackson Dart, what a gutsy performance he put on him and Jugs. You know, Ole Miss's running game is for real. Their defense with Pete Golden, that's something to be feared for because if they could keep this up all season, Ole Miss may be able to shock Alabama the way they played and the way Bama played. Now, I don't want to get too ahead of myself with this, but Ole Miss, a great win against Tulane, definitely helped them from their ranking from 20, and I think them jumping 3 spots, well deserved. I think Lane Kiffin, he's been known in the past after a big win to blow it. They got Georgia Tech next week, so we will see this week. We will see what he brings out of that. But Ole Miss 17 team. Now, coming in at number 18 is Colorado. And College Game Day will be in Boulder this week as they take on Colorado State. And Colorado, the hype is real. Colorado is no longer a surprise. They're for real. Primetime Deion Sanders is legit as it gets. Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, that whole entire team. USC, Oregon, Washington, Utah, UCLA, Oregon State, everybody in the Pac-12, even the nation, needs to be put on notice. Colorado's here. They're here to stay. And, everyone laughed and said, oh, Colorado may be lucky to get 3 wins. Coach Prime, you can't do it. Well, he beat the runner-up team in the beat TCU, who was the runner-up in the national championship game 1 year ago, and then beats Nebraska, 36-14. Jeff Sims throwing those picks. Colorado is scary. They're going to give some teams some competition, and they're only going to get better with time. Even Coach Deion Sanders said in his press conference, "We're just getting started. We're just getting better. We haven't even played our best football yet." Think about that. That's a little scary that they haven't even played their best football yet. But Colorado at 18 now. At number 19, you got the Oklahoma Boomer Sooners. Now, this is a very interesting one. Brent Venables, 2 great defensive performances this week. Has Oklahoma turned the corner? Has Oklahoma finally fixed the defense or found a defense for that? Forget fixing it. I don't think they had one to begin with. But fixed it. Has Brent Venables been able to finally fix that defense? The offense was never the issue. Dylan Gabriel in that offense, very talented, very high flying. They can get it done. But were they able to fix it? We will see when they get to stiffer competition. And based on all the talent Oklahoma has, them at 19, Colorado jumped them, which Colorado, arguably the 2 best wins in college football right now, next to Florida State and Texas. But Oklahoma at 19, I don't think that's bad ranking for them. It's a little lower than what we're used to, but it's not a terrible ranking. We got to see what they do against better competition. The offense for Oklahoma is looking fabulous as always. Defense looking great, but let's see if they can keep it going. Now at number 20, you got the North Carolina Tar Heels. And boy, oh boy, after they found their defense last week against South Carolina, 9 sacks, forcing Spencer Rattler out the pocket and giving him all kinds of problems. And this week against Appalachian State, they struggled, especially at home. Appalachian State, it took overtime. Now, App State, let's be honest, App State's a really good team. They give a lot of teams, Power 5 teams, struggles. North Carolina's one of many, but it, there was a lot of very questionable calls in that game. And, many people may say North Carolina maybe escaped that game. Because Drake May didn't look as good. The defense obviously gave up a lot. The defense that we saw against South Carolina was nowhere to be found. But boy, oh boy, North Carolina, like a couple other teams this week, have got some things to fix. But it's very fixable. It's very fixable. App State, tricky opponent. Got to give them some sort of break. But North Carolina maybe got away with one. Should that have been a PI call? I don't know. But North Carolina at 20. Now, coming in at 21, you've got the Duke Blue Devils. Obviously, they're a huge win on that Labor Day weekend, Monday night, against Clemson at home, 28-7. The best Duke football's looked in quite some time. And then they followed up with a 42-7 win over Lafayette. So, Duke, Riley Leonard, they didn't go up, they didn't go down, they stayed the same, which I get, Duke, did what they were supposed to. They do have that great win over Clemson, but also you can't justify jumping them over a couple teams ahead of them like North Carolina. They struggled against App. You can't say. Many people would say, oh, that Clemson win is obviously better than South Carolina. But as you see, Clemson is not what we think they are. But Duke, are they for real? I believe so. I said it last week. I'll say it again. Duke is the real deal. They're here to stay. I think Duke is a dark horse contender in the ACC, and I think they're going to prove that in the weeks to come. And especially if they get a win over Notre Dame at home, then the committee will have no choice but to move them up then. Coming in at 22 is Miami. We got a couple new teams coming up here, and Miami is one of them at 22. They beat Miami of Ohio. Obviously, nothing to brag about. But then what they did to Texas Tech, that Miami offense is looking really good. Defense hits hard, but gives up a lot of yards and points. But the offense is looking good, looking steady. And I think Miami, like Duke, is going to be a very dark horse contender in the ACC. The ACC's got a lot of teams this year that can contend, from Florida State to Louisville to Miami to Duke to UNC. NC State's still there, obviously. So Miami at 22, I think the way they played against Texas A&M and looked the way they did against an SEC school, Miami at 22, I think that's a very justified ranking. Tyler Van Dyke looked very good. Like I said, that offense looked tremendous. And, Miami's a hard team to beat at home, and it just shows right there. They put up a lot of points, and they score, and their defense plays hard at home. But the big question is when Miami goes out on the road this season, is Miami going to truly be back, or are they just going to be the Miami that comes and goes like we've seen before? Now, 23, Washington State, another Pac-12 team, a team that deserves a little more respect than they're getting. This is the second year in a row that they have beat Wisconsin. Washington State, I don't know how in the world Oregon State, Washington State ain't picked up anywhere. And to give credit to the proper owner for this, Jeffrey from Only Talk Sports, my good buddy, mentioned that Washington State, Oregon State should have been, picked up by the Big 12, or they're just going to end up in the Mountain West. Because Washington State, Oregon State, they're good enough to beat a lot of teams. I mean, Washington State obviously beat Wisconsin 2 years in a row. That's not a fluke if you can do it 2 years in a row, home and away. So that's very interesting. And Cam Ward, he is very electric. That Washington State offense, very electric. It all starts with Cam Ward. Defense, like a lot of teams, struggled, but looking at it in a shell, the score, as they always say, is not an indicator. It was 31-22, but it was 24-9 at halftime. Come out, they score, and it's 31-9, and all of a sudden, Wisconsin gets a couple touchdowns, make it look a little closer. But obviously, Washington State, Oregon State need to get picked up somewhere because these teams can fly, and they're going to be good for college football for years to come. You can even make the argument maybe you could jump them ahead of Miami and Duke. Maybe that's how big that win against Wisconsin is. But 23 is 23. Now we get to the last two here. Number 24, UCLA and Chip Kelly. UCLA with two big wins against non-Power 5 teams, San Diego State and Coastal Carolina. UCLA, lost, DTR last year and Zach Charbonnet, and many people were saying, can UCLA replace that? Is the defense going to be somewhat fixable? Well, the defense, has been somewhat good. Dante Moore, 5-star recruit, he flipped from Oregon to UCLA, has played very good up to this point. UCLA has always, under Chip Kelly, had a very good offense, but the problem is Chip Kelly doesn't recruit, so UCLA offense and their entire football team sometimes suffers. But right now, two big wins over San Diego State and Coastal Carolina, who are expected to be really good teams in their non-Power 5 conferences. I'm looking forward to seeing what UCLA does this year. You see these teams coming down the bottom now. You got Duke, Miami, Washington State, UCLA. These are all teams that, got overlooked. And now, after a couple big wins, now people are starting to take a little bit of a notice on them. And UCLA, people, always count them out. But UCLA could make some noise in the Pac-12 as well. Keep an eye out on that. And now coming in at number 25 is the Iowa Hawkeyes. Oh, Iowa. Only we knew ye. Iowa, scored 24 points against Utah State, scored 20 against Iowa State this past weekend, which is nothing to be ashamed of. Rivalry game, everything to play for. Both teams want to win badly. So I don't blame that against Brian Ferentz and the Iowa offense. Just a joke. But Iowa defense, incredible. Defense can fly. Offense does what it does. And Iowa, after a very good win against Iowa State, and couple teams you maybe could say, oh, maybe why don't you put, say, a couple teams ahead of them? But Iowa has got some, Iowa State more than likely could be a bowl team. Utah State's a very good non-Power 5 team, especially in the Mountain West. So you got to give Iowa some credit. Plus, they play in the Big Ten, and they have a lot of talent on the defensive side. And I think the AP committee takes into factor all that. But that is this week's AP poll, top 25. A lot of interesting movement this week. We saw, a couple teams go up. We saw some teams go down. Obviously, you saw Clemson. They're no longer in the poll anymore. That's maybe where that hurts Duke there. But yes, let me know what you think after a big weekend of college football. Texas with the big win, Florida State looking good. But we're going to learn a lot about these teams in the coming week. Primetime in Colorado. They're for real. They're here. But please subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. Please sure to hit the notification bell for more great content here at Sports Talk with Austin. And as always, I'm your host. Peace out.